Hey, how's everyone doing? All right, so I wanted to talk here for a couple minutes about chapter one. So, chapter one in the book really just sets the scene and sets the tone for what persuasion is, what we're talking about, generally speaking. So, I just wanted to discuss that quickly. So, persuasion, whatever you coming in thinking it means, probably has something to do with convincing people, arguing, changing people's minds, things of that nature, which is partially true, but really at its fundamental level, when we're talking about persuasion, we're talking about communication between at least two people, sometimes obviously many more. Persuasive campaigns can be huge. You can be trying to persuade um, towns, cities, entire countries, the world, any group, but it's at least two people where there is an intention to either change or reinforce or shape people's attitudes, beliefs, um, or behaviors, right? And we'll talk more about what attitudes are, beliefs are, opinions, and the differentiation between them in subsequent chapters. But it's different than, just a typical communicative act where communication, there doesn't necessarily need to be intent. The receiver doesn't necessarily need to even understand the message that's been sent for a communication action to occur, right? Communication is very basic in that a message of some kind is sent in some way. But a persuasive communication act is really only considered successful if the receiver not only understands the message, but that there's intention from the sender of the message to persuade, and the receiver must either change or reinforce some attitude or belief or something. So something needs to happen. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean to change someone's mind. It can simply be to reinforce what someone's already thinking. If you are, say, you have a positive attitude towards something, anything. Pick a politician, and you want to vote for a particular politician, and you think of them favorably, and you watch a advertisement about that politician, and it makes you feel even more supportive of that person. Well, then a persuasive act occurred in that you have reinforced or strengthened a belief. So there was a change in some capacity in how you felt, even though it went from positive to more positive. It was still a persuasive act because you changed. Obviously, the reverse would be, and the obvious is, you persuade someone by changing their mind. So you think you like something, and I convince you that it's not a good thing, and now you've changed your mind and you don't like it. So obviously, persuasion has occurred there. So persuasion, there is intention, there is understanding from the receiver. There's a lot more things involved than just a communication act at a basic level, right? So obviously persuasion occurs all the time, everywhere, right? Sometimes it's really large, major things, and sometimes it's very small things, just deciding with friends where you want to eat dinner. And, your friend wants to go to Chinese and you want to go to Mexican for dinner. And you talk about it and you end up going to Mexican, where you decide, well, then you've persuaded them that Mexican was the place to go, right? So simple things are also doing that. Your wife says, take out the garbage, and you say, I can't right now. I've got to do something else. Make this video. And she says, yeah, but the garbage truck is coming, and this has to go out before the garbage truck comes. Otherwise, we're going to have this trash until next week. I said, oh, well, I should take the trash out right now. If you can't tell, that was an example of exactly what happened this morning, right? So I was persuaded that it was time to go take out the garbage because I was presented with new evidence that made sense, right? So it's persuasion. It happens all the time. Obviously, being an effective persuader is a great skill to have for a number of reasons. And I think a lot of times when you think of it that way, it sounds almost nefarious, or that it's a negative, or that you're being conniving or tricking people, but it's not. It's just knowing. It's just a communication skill that's really valuable, and not necessarily for bad, you know, reasons, or to do, to trick people or anything like that. I think you can tell, right? So it is a really important skill to have, not only to be able to do it, but also to recognize when persuasion is occurring from others, and seeing it for what it is, right? So there's a difference between influence and persuasion, right? So influence is a power that affects something. So if you influence something, you have a power to affect it, right? But that is just a part of overall persuasion, which is using communication to intentionally change or reinforce an attitude, a belief, or a behavior. Persuasion is different than coercion. It's different than propaganda, and it's different than education, if you will. So coercion, if you coerce someone, you are involving force or a threat of force. Whereas persuasion, it's just words, and you are not threatening someone, right? So if you coerce someone to doing something, saying, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to break your legs, that's not persuasion. You didn't persuade them. You didn't change fundamentally their attitude towards something. You threaten them, right? So that's coercion. That's very different than persuasion. You think of propaganda. So propaganda is a type of persuasion where you are trying to persuade mass or large audiences with the purpose of achieving a goal. So in that sense, it's persuasion. But what you're doing is you're not letting any other outside influences or forces or communication compete with your ideas, right? So propaganda is one-sided. It doesn't allow for other ideas. It's a little different, right? And education, you may change someone's attitude or opinions when you educate them, but really the intention of educating is just to share information or knowledge. So that's a little different than persuasion, where the intention is to influence a change in an attitude, a belief, or behavior. Now, if persuasion occurs as a result of an educational process, so be it. But then again, if your intention wasn't to persuade, was it really persuasion? Or did someone just change based on what they've been educated to, right? So that's kind of a brief overview, right, of chapter 1 and persuasion in general. In the subsequent chapters in the book, they will go over attitudes, the importance of attitudes, what an attitude is, and it's really at the heart of persuasion is attitude change, right, or attitude reinforcement. From attitudes, you can affect behaviors, right, which is really the goal. A lot of the time, you want to change how someone behaves, right? So we'll introduce persuasion. We'll introduce this idea of attitudes. The next set of chapters will cover theories of persuasion. So specific situations and ways in which you can go about achieving a persuasive goal, how you set up a communication to effectively persuade someone. So given this situation, what's the best way to form your message? So the book will cover a series of different theories saying, okay, well, in this situation, when this is present, the most effective form of communication is messages that include X, Y, and Z, or whatever, right? After that, we'll go into the persuasion process. So things, message factors, credibility, source factors, right? Things like that. And then finally, it will touch on ethics, right? So the final chapter is about the ethics in persuasion, right? When does persuasion switch to coercion, switch to propaganda? How do you knock over that line? What is an ethical way to persuade? an audience, right? And you have to recognize who your audience is and what your audience is looking for when you are being an ethical persuader, if you will. So I think that gives a little overview of chapter 1, and I will be making more videos to send out. All right. Have a good day, guys.